Good afternoon. This is the legislation group project for A635. We will be analyzing HEA 1426, specifically the graduation pathways portion. My name is Ashley Thompson. Also in this project is Evan Bergman, Erie Smith, and Dr. Lisa Klaus. So just to give you an overview of this grad pathways legislation, it's expanding the requirements for graduation. It's not just a diploma. Students will have to prove career readiness and college readiness. This is going to apply to students graduating in the class of 2023, but schools should be starting right away providing these pathways, these opportunities for students to meet these new requirements. So I'm going to switch over to this document that shows the additional requirements. There are now 3 boxes that kids will have to check off. So the first one is that diploma. So that has not changed. Students will still earn a diploma. They also need to learn and demonstrate employability skills, and there's a couple ways they can do that. They could do a project-based learning experience, a service-based learning experience, or a work-based learning experience. And then the third portion, they have to prove their post-secondary ready competencies. So they will have to pass maybe some sort of test. They might be a career and tech ed concentrator, so earning a C or higher in 6 high school credits in a career pathway, or completing a locally created pathway. And that will be done at a district level. So going back to our presentation, if you click this link right here, it's going to give you lots of more details, but that's just a brief overview of the graduation requirements. So we started to analyze the impacts that this would have on schools. So our course offerings, some might be eliminated while other programs are expanded. So it depends on those career pathways and the interest, student interest and enrollment as far as those pathways. So some programs are going to get a lot more staffing, a lot more money, and others are going to be just completely eliminated if they're not fitting into a pathway, possibly. We're hoping that it's going to provide students more opportunities. So besides those classroom experiences, hopefully getting outside the 4 walls of schools and getting experiences that are going to prepare them for what comes after high school. We're really worried about the impacts on small districts versus large districts. Small districts don't have the resources that large districts already have in place. A lot of large districts already have career centers or good CTE programs that are going to lend themselves well to this new requirement. Small districts might be struggling. And we're really wondering where charters would fall into this. Because certainly new charters who have very small pools of resources, they would certainly struggle to get their kids to meet these new standards. As far as staffing, we're worried about who's going to be tracking these students. Is it going to be counselors? Are counselors going to be able to take on this additional workload of informing parents of the new requirements of keeping kids on track, that sort of thing. These new requirements force schools to have community relationships. So hopefully it would strengthen those connections. We also see how it could strain them. If the schools are asking and asking and asking for these experiences for their students, that could put a strain on the business and then that relationship as a whole. There's going to be a demand for certain teaching licenses, such as family and consumer sciences. All of those CTE, the business, the tech ed, there's going to be a big push for those courses because of the experiences that they provide and how well they fall into that work-based or project-based learning requirement. As far as other implications, you can look in our appendix, and we have linked some data that shows graduation rates may drop. A district in the Indianapolis area did an initial analysis and found that graduation rates would drop below 50%. So, just the time that it takes to get schools prepared for these new requirements, it may take a while, and it really might affect the kids as far as how many are graduating still. As far as the demand on staff and students, it feels like more and more is being added while nothing's being taken away. So that could cause a lot of emotional effects. As far as elementary, middle schools, they're also going to have some extra duties as far as preparing those kids for high school, for those pathways by the time they get to ninth grade, and following those college and career readiness standards.
Yes, so I am Yuri Smith, and I am going to start with impact on educational equity. One thing that we noted about this is that if it is properly implemented, this policy could provide a plethora of equitable opportunities for all students. So, some of the positives that we discussed. This bill provides students with an individualized plan path to meeting requirements via pathways. This program allows students to start thinking about um, the pathways that they choose to take as adults as early as in the sixth grade. And that's something that's really important because we talked about as a group how a lot of students don't begin to think about this until they enter a college campus. And so that was really important. This bill also moves Indiana high schools away from the current diploma mill model. So opposed to having mills of students who just getting diplomas, but then what do they do with those diplomas? Um, it prepares students for a more demanding job market and post-secondary opportunities. This bill also disrupts the status quo of graduation tests as definitive measurements of student success because this bill allows for different options. As we went through the bill, we broke down how it gives you the option to take the ACT, the SAT, different military tests, and different tests to get certifications. So that was something different. It gives students a more voice in what they would like to pursue, opposed to saying you have to take the ECA, and if you don't pass, you don't graduate unless you meet all these requirements. And then lastly, this another positive of this bill is that it promotes transferable skills. And one of the things that we compared it to was kind of like the transferable skills that Teach for America's teachers receive in going through that program. So that program is a program that allows business folks who are interested in their own business, different areas of society, to teach in inner city schools, underserved schools, for 2 years, and then they go into their respective fields. Well, it provides those staff with transferable skills that can work in any field. And that's one of the benefits of this bill. It provides transferable skills to where students want to go to college with a trade or go into owning their own business. They still have those transferable skills that they earned while they were in high school and starting the sixth grade. So some of the negative impacts, some of the negatives that this bill will have, this bill struggles with meeting the demand for historically poor performing high schools, for example, IPS schools. So, how will this bill be equitable for historically performing high schools? Will schools like Manual High School, which is a charter school, or Northwest High School, which was a IPS high school, will they be able to get the same kind of business partnerships and resources as schools like Carmel and Fishers? One of the stories that I shared with the group was that I was recently at um, Fishers High School, and on the board, the scoreboard during the summer, it has job postings at like Cruise Car Wash for $10 an hour. And I'm like, man, that is amazing. How will public schools and small charter schools be able to compete with the bigger school districts like Ben Davis, Carmel, etc.? Businesses may prefer to work with more selective districts. As a business, why would I build a partnership with a small charter school that just, they just started, that just took over a poor performing public high school when I could work with a bigger district that has been proven that, that is that produces more results or better results. Why would I partner with a school that has less athletic offerings when I could promote my business in the programs at the bigger districts? So those are some of the things that we discussed. Other negatives are that some course offerings will have to be eliminated. Uh, this also could stretch school dollars even thinner. Most schools complain about the amount of dollars they have in regards to providing students with resources. Now, those dollars will even be stretched thinner. The demand for certain teaching license will drop, while the demand for other licenses will increase. Who's going to teach these different classes? And when you have them teach these new classes, what will they not be able to teach anymore? How will tracking work for the transient students? If a student moves from a small district, a rural school, and they transfer into a public school, how will how will that be tracked? How will the student's work that he's done in sixth to eighth grade transfer or be communicated to the new school that he has in a bigger district, 9th through 12th grade? So those are some of the things that we talked about. We also talked about how will this be equitable for special education programs, teachers, and ELL students? One of our group members was sharing about her child being a special education student, and how, she would want to know how will this impact his individual education plan, his IEP. And so those are some of the things we discussed. This plan's response to equity. So by we plan to provide communication in English and Spanish. Okay. Now we did talk about there are other languages that will have to be addressed, but for the most part, we will communicate in English and Spanish to those communities. We do have a plan for those other communities, but that'll be on a plan per school district basis. But for the general plan, it'll be in English and Spanish. We will proactively address implications for students with special needs. So some of the things we talked about is making sure that our special education departments plan to meet with each and every parent to address how this will impact their students' individual education plan and the other needs that those students may have. We talked about recognizing cultural value through locally created pathways. Um, we talked about how this plan instills value in vocational fields. And then lastly, we talked about actively engaging parents and community stakeholders and utilize their expertise. One of the main things that we talked about was getting our parents on board so that they could be advocates for us. So if we get the parents on board, then we can get community businesses, we can get the students to get behind this, and we can really make this thing grow. And so some of the things that we'll talk about later on will be how to get those parents involved, going into churches, coming up with different community events so that parents will feel comfortable, but also are learning about this new initiative that will impact their students.
Hi, this is Evan Bergman. So I'm here to talk more about our actual advocacy plan. So A couple things. It is critical that we do everything possible to facilitate student success, and the following steps focus on parent partners within this program. So we need to work on our outreach. We're going to have to do quite a bit to educate our students and our families and our community about the changes that this policy has and the impact it has for all students. So we would hold community meetings and make sure that all parents are aware of these new graduation requirements and the plan that we have in place for their students. Additionally, we would do mailings. We would have digital presentations and also one-to-one parent counselor meetings for when requested, and also help promote school and family partnerships. So our audience, we want to focus on parents. We see parents as an advocate for students, and we see parents as a community asset. And what I mean by that too is that many of our parents, they work in local businesses, and we want to engage them and make them part of this process and utilize their expertise in creating some of these pathways and opportunities for students to develop these transferable skills. So how we will communicate, we have multiple forms. There'll be district-wide, both written and digital. There'll be all calls to notify parents of upcoming meetings and convocations and events to help communicate this information. We will have community meetings and bring in our parents, bring in our community members. We want to utilize local churches and businesses and post information in those places. We want to invite parents to our classrooms and our career and vocational experts into our classrooms. Let's get them in there. Let them see what our kids are working on, what they're doing, and get their input and expertise. How we will implement this plan. So immediately we'll have staff training for the end of the year prior to to initiating the plan. So all staff are aware of the policy and the district plan that is in place to implement it for all students. The summer and fall would have community meetings, educating those parents, those students in the community on the policy and on the pathway offerings within the district. Fall Q1, we would have student convocations that would need to take place for those 8th graders that are beginning the pathway process, but probably also for some of those high school grade levels as well, to make sure that they are abreast on all of the pertinent information and are aware of all pathway offerings and requirements that they need to meet. Fall Q1, we would begin creating and nurturing the partnerships with businesses in the community to ensure that those students have those authentic experiences and can develop those transferable skills. Progress assessment end of semester 1 and end of semester 2, and reflection and modification based on the successes and failures in our data. Lastly, parent communication. We would send letters to all parents. We would place yard signs in church and businesses, and we would be present at community events. We could do things like movies in the park. We can host community meetings to inform parents, and also utilize digital recordings of community meetings and make those accessible via school websites, social media, and other platforms. Okay. Lastly, we have some appendixes that will be available in box, and also a parent outreach letter, which will be available with our submission as well. Thank you for your time.